Hi there, and welcome to Ian's Engage channel. I'm Ian. In the previous Tricky Bit progress report, I showed how I was working my way down a list of jobs that would end with the second section of the Tricky Bit being installed in the train room. In this video, I'm going to continue working my way down the list, and once again, we'll see how far I get before I have to stop in order to make this video. Before I begin though, I'm going to insert a couple of tasks into the list. The first is to drill holes for dropper wires in the train room. The second is to test that the dropper wires are conducting electricity after they have been soldered to the track, but before the track has been glued down. As the track was temporarily in position, the dropper wire locations could now be marked. After removing my homemade track setter templates, I used a paint pen to mark the sleeper below which I wanted to solder the dropper wires. I also used the paint pen to mark the cork either side of the sleeper, so I could see the position once the track had been removed. Next, I used a Sharpie pen to mark the rail top where I needed to attach the black dropper wires, using the maxim of black to the back. Once the locations had been marked on the track and the baseboard, I could remove the track to prepare it for dropper wires. Preparing the track for dropper wires involved moving sleepers around to make space for the wires to be soldered to the bottom of the rails. I used the paint pen again to mark the bottom of the sleeper that I wanted to move. Using my utility knife, I then cut the sleeper webbing between the adjacent sleepers. The sleepers were also connected by a very thin strand of plastic that ran down the side of the rails, and this link also needed to be severed. Once that was done, the marked sleeper could be slid to one side. There was now enough gap between the sleepers to solder dropper wires to the rails. I repeated this process for all of the marked sleepers. Before committing to drilling the holes into the foam, I quickly laid the track again and marked exactly where the holes should be drilled into the baseboard. I then used the same method I'd used to drill holes for the frog wires. A bradawl was used to pierce the cork. The location was marked with a toothpick. The drill guide was aligned over the toothpick. The drill bit was used to drill through the drill guide. And the process was repeated for each dropper wire hole. Now that I had holes drilled in the foam baseboard, I could use it as a template to drill holes into the baseboard in the train room. Once I'd got the section into position, I poked toothpicks through each of the dropper holes to mark their position in the foam below. I also marked where the servo wires would exit the servo enclosure boxes. I then removed the section. I could now use the same method as previously to drill straight perpendicular holes using the drill guide. I repeated this sequence for each dropper wire hole. If you remember, when I installed the first section of the tricky bit, I needed to dig a channel in the foam below. This was needed to make space for the servo wiring. It also gave me space to drill larger holes away from the wall that would accommodate the servo motor cable and connector. I marked out an area between the toothpicks I'd inserted through the servo enclosure boxes. I then used my utility knife and a chisel to cut out the area I'd marked. Looking at the area I'd cut out, I decided to extend the area, moving it even further away from the wall. Once cut out, I then drilled larger 10mm holes that the servo connectors would fit through. Of course, the drill battery died while I was doing this. And yes, once a new battery was fitted, I made a mistake, where the drill got away from me.
There's a hole there now.
But on I pressed until I'd created the holes through the plywood. Once complete, I could return to the workbench. Having made space below the rails to solder dropper wires to, I could add solder pads to the rails. To do this, I first roughed up the bottom of the rail using a mini file. As well as giving the solder something to flow into, this also cleaned the rail. Next, I applied solder paste to the rail. I then applied some solder to my soldering iron and touched the tip of the iron to the flux for a couple of seconds, until a solder pad formed. I found previously, by trial and error, that a temperature of around 420 centigrade works best for this. I repeated this operation until I'd added solder pads to all of the areas that required dropper wires. Once that was done, I could proceed with adding the dropper wires themselves. I was using 22 AWG stranded wire for my droppers, and once cut to length and stripped, I like to fold the ends over onto themselves. I could then begin tinning the end of each wire. Before attempting to attach a wire, I needed to ensure I was following my wiring scheme of black to the back, so I referred to the marks I'd made on the rail tops earlier. Before soldering each wire to a rail, I put a 90-degree bend into the bare ends. This was so that the droppers could be positioned facing inwards towards the centre of the track. I then brought the tinned end of the wire to the solder pad on the rail and applied heat for a second or two. A quick tug on the wire confirmed whether or not a good connection had been made. I repeated this process until I'd added all of the dropper wires to the track. While I may have ensured that all of my dropper wires had a good physical connection to each rail, I next needed to make sure that they all had a good electrical connection. To do this, I use my multimeter in continuity mode. I worked my way through each dropper wire and tested that there was a continuous connection from the rail to the end of the dropper wire. I was eventually happy, so I could move on to putting the track back down onto the baseboard. But unfortunately, that's as far as I got this week. I didn't quite manage to get to the end of my list, but I got close. I'm not going to use the excuse that my hand is still playing up, but it is. It's quite satisfying that I can tick off quite a few jobs though. I marked where the dropper wires would be placed, and I got the holes for them drilled into the foam baseboard, which meant I could use that as a template to drill holes in the train room. I prepared the track for dropper wires by making space for them by moving sleepers around, and this allowed me to solder the dropper wires to the underside of the rails, which I then tested for electrical continuity, and that's where I ran out of time. I'm still hoping to get this section installed in the train room in the next couple of weeks. So, watch this space, as they say. Please let me know if you can think of anything else I need to do before I commit to installing this section in the train room. Alternatively, if you've got any hints, tips, useful tools or techniques to pass on to a fellow N-Gage modeller, or if you simply want to say hello, then please do so in the comment section. Anything and everything you've got to say will be greatly appreciated. In the meantime, thanks ever so much for watching. Hopefully I'll have another update on my progress soon. Bye.